All right, this is Lester Mascon and Brett Galvin, and today we're with Cassius Jones from Smarking. Again, this is Parker X, and we're going to talk a little bit about data and what's going on. But first, Cassius, I'd love to kind of hear a little bit about your background, how you got started in all this, and where you think it's going.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Brett, Lester, thanks so much for having me on. Been a fan of the show and just excited to be here. Let's see. Yeah. So I just recently celebrated my 5th anniversary at Smarking. Gosh, it feels like even longer than that. When I first joined, Wen and Malkai, we were working out of their house in a neighborhood called in Bayview in San Francisco, California. If you know anything about San Francisco, Bayview is not what you think of. No cable cars, no views of the bay. But yeah, we were working on folding tables and just trying to make it work. For better or for worse, they said, hey, Cassius, we need you to figure out how to sell this thing. And at the time, it was an idea that, somehow there was a lot of data in the parking industry and that there were similarities in parking, like especially relative to the hotel and airline industries, that could make this data very powerful, specifically for sort of like the supply side of the industry. And I think that was what really resonated with me. I think, when you take a look at a lot of the really interesting technology companies in parking, a lot of folks are really focused on sort of the consumer experience. And what I thought was interesting about Smarking is really more of the focus on sort of like, how can we help the folks that own and manage these assets better take advantage of some of the data that's already sitting in their revenue control systems, meters, mobile payments, reservations, what have you. It's been a wild ride, Lester. So, initially we had some success with municipalities, and then struck a chord with some real estate owners, and was able to win a couple of the parking operations companies as clients. And yeah, we've been building new features and trying to refine our value proposition. And 5 years later, I've got just as much conviction in what we're doing as I did when I started. And to be candid, I really think the parking industry is quite an exciting place to work. It seems like there's a little bit less hoopla about it now, but I remember kind of when we first started, there was a little bit of this nonsense, like, oh, autonomous vehicles, what's going to happen? All this nonsense, right? It's like, the way that I think about it is like, what Airbnb did to hotels, they didn't put hotels out of business. The hotel business needed to change, right? And a lot of the things that are sort of come into parking, not going to put parking out of business, but the industry needs to change. And for the most part, I think change is an exciting thing to be a part of. So,
just out of curiosity, like, what was the original, like when Smarking formed, like, what was the idea behind it? Like, what were you going to, like, specifically, what was the mission statement? What were you going to do to bring value to the clients that signed up for placing this service in place? Like, original intent. I know it's changed now, obviously, because we've had a lot of changes hit our market, but like day one, what was it all about?
So day one, I think the biggest thing that we talk about is sort of like yield management. And if you think about airlines and hotels from like a fundamental economic dynamics perspective, what you have is a fixed amount of perishable inventory. If you don't sell a seat on an airplane, then you can't sell it ever again, right? You don't sell a hotel room for a night, you can't ever sell it again. It's the same thing with a parking space, right? And then on the demand side in airlines and hotels, it's constantly varied, right? It's 4th of July weekend, folks are flying all over the place, traveling. You want an ocean view room, you're going to pay out the nose. But if you want a city view room on some random weekend in October, you'll get a great discount, right? So those industries had basically adopted business intelligence and yield management in order to basically try to figure out what are some interesting things that we can do from like a variable pricing perspective and a fine tuning and oversell perspective. And we thought that there was a similar opportunity to deploy that in parking. To be honest, like the vision and mission haven't changed. I think the biggest thing that's happened, Lester, is we've become a little bit more sympathetic to the current status quo of the industry, and also just realizing rather that things are the way that they are, and that like there have been a lot of smart professionals in this industry for a very long time that have been doing things a certain way, and that it's not like going to be this light switch where all of a sudden we're going to have dynamic and variable pricing left and right. It's a slow, methodical change, and if anything that's changed, it's sort of like our expectations around how quickly we're going to move to this world where prices are constantly fluctuating and sent into autonomous vehicles. It's a long.
Seems like a lot of the opportunities in this. I think like a lot of the opportunity lies in the municipalities and some of the larger universities, airports, that sort of thing, which often takes like real legislation to be able to put something like that into effect. So that's probably the first providing the data, then trying to come up with the plan and the idea, then modeling what you could do if you were actually reacting to the data, and then trying to get legislation and customers on board to follow. It seemed like the path you would have to take to accomplish that.
Yeah, I really love working with municipalities that, way back in the day, for whatever reason, when I was just a bumbling sales guy trying to figure out what to do, a lot of these cities in California were the nicest to me. They took my call and we signed them up for clients, and we've done good work for them. Basically, variable pricing for on-street, at the time when we had come into the industry, the SFMTA and LA Express Park had sort of already done this, right? And they had done it with big federal grants. We're talking $18 million, $20 million to make these kinds of things happen. And so there was an opportunity there for us to basically say, hey, look, you don't need a federal grant in order to do variable pricing, right? We can get this done for you in a way that's more financially viable. And so it's super rewarding to work with municipalities, especially because, when we think about parking management from a municipal perspective, they're interested in more than just revenues, right? There's a congestion management component to it. There's a land use component to it. There's an economic vitality component to it. And so it's really meaningful to kind of engage on that kind of level. The challenges with municipalities, though, changing parking prices if you're a city is tough. It is a tough business, right? You got city councils and interested stakeholders and downtown business associations. I honestly think that, municipal parking managers are, some of the most underappreciated public servants, because they're just getting shot at left and right from people who have got a ticket, this, that, or the other thing. And they're, providing an incredible amount of revenue for the cities to fund.
Well, the merchant community themselves are probably the toughest, probably more difficult than the actual clients.
And then you also have commercial operators who are at you all the time, and they don't have the constraints that you have.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then, so on the flip side, though, I it's also rewarding to work with the commercial operators, because if you come up with a good idea, if you were able to dig in and say, hey, look, the data says you got to be jacking up this early bird rate because they're taking up all of your space and they're not paying you anything, and then they're like, okay, sounds good, let's do it. The next day, right, these folks can act real quick. Then, for the most part, let's not be candid, right? I mean, or let's not shy away from it. These folks are, profit motivated. And so, hey, I got no problem making my clients money. So.
Cool. Thanks for joining us, Cassius. I guess we wanted to zero in on a little bit of the live information that you're getting out relative to what you've been seeing over the last 3 months, where it comes to the recovery.
Yeah.
The different phases of how that's working out. I think your company's in a unique position, and yourself reviewing that data to sort of give us some insight. You have a presentation on that you've been working on. So yeah, it'd be great to hear a little bit about that.
I got to be honest, like when we first started thinking about all the data that existed, it was like, wow, all that data is just garbage at this point. Like, what are you going to do with it? But now that thinking about how you're starting to track the data that's coming in now and the recovery and everything, I mean, that's got to be more valuable than just about anything at this moment. So I'm excited for this part of it.
It's it's been a wild ride. So like, pre-COVID, the data is always interesting. We're tracking things, but for the most part, I mean, there are certain facilities that are really variable. And I think when you look at a chart, you enjoy like spiky lines more than straight lines, right? We're looking for activity. And so I, in a way, I'd always like sort of like back in October of 19, I was like, man, I just wish things were like a little bit more interesting. Like, man, did I get a little bit more than I bargained for? Maybe the things started going, getting spiky the wrong way. But Yeah, it's been a really interesting time to be in my seat. I think this is, as close to as unprecedented an event as you can get around impact to the transportation space. And we've assembled a good book of clients, look at more than 2,000 locations across the U.S. and in Canada, and so got a pretty good insight into how things are going. So yeah. This shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody, but it was really the week of March 16th that things started to fall off a cliff. And we saw a little bit of weakness that prior week. Interestingly enough, at the risk of sounding like a pompous Bay Area individual, we saw the West Coast market start to react a little bit faster than some of our clients on the East Coast. Particularly in New York. So in New York, we didn't see things start to fall until the week of the March 24th, which in hindsight, maybe we wish they had done. Obviously, the situation in New York in March and April wasn't pretty. But yeah, we saw like a massive drop in parking transaction volumes for, I would say, 90% of clients. The big drop was the week of March 16th. So that's the one where sort of goes down in history, but we didn't really bottom out. So imagine the chart, we're here and then shoop, but we had a couple weeks of bottoming out. For the most part, I would say 99% of our clients fit into this bill, and I would venture that that would apply to pretty much all parking operations. Bottomed out basically the week of April 6th or the week of April 13th or the week of April 20th. So those 3 weeks was the low in terms of parking transactions and parking revenues. The best way that we would measure it is sort of as a comparison to last year. And basically on average, and this is a new product that we just built called the industry benchmark. How do we pool all this data together and just put a benchmark on where the industry is? Yeah, we were looking at revenues down 95%. So that was the depths of the crisis. Those 3 weeks. So the good news, if we're looking for good news, is that it's been sort of like climbing steadily ever since. And even in this second wave of cases that we see coming up, primarily in the South and the Southwest, we don't see ourselves retesting the lows of April at all, which is, if you're a parking professional, is a good thing. Maybe if you're an epidemiologist, you'd like to see things go back down, but I'm not in that business. So especially for some of our Southwest clients, we see transaction volume sort of like leveling off through June and July, but not so much going back down, if you will.
So out of curiosity, so you're tracking revenue really closely. Are you looking at, or have you even thought to look at, like how monthly parkers or the parkers, the people that are coming to the building because they have a pass or a card, like what they've trended at? Are they starting to return as well, or is it just the transient side?
It's a really good question. So to be perfectly candid, we've got insights into monthly parking activities. Most of our integrations, Lester, come through the parks system. Yep. We do have, I would say 12 clients that send us monthly parking revenues, but for the most part, I can tell you how many monthly parkers are coming in and out of the facility, but whether these folks are still paying and just not coming.
I don't think I'd be interested in the revenue. Yeah, I don't think I'd be interested in the revenue side at all. I just want to know if people are starting to come back to their offices or not. Like what's that recovery look like? Is it matching? Is it following the same trend as the recovery related to revenue, or is it different?
Yeah, for the most part, I would actually say it is the same. We are starting to see people come back. So yeah, I should have done a better job here, team, of segmenting what I talk. So that first little portion is sort of like how the how the crisis has been the same across the parking industry. I think there's a whole bunch of things that we've actually been able to dig into around sort of like how the recovery actually has been different, either across regions or asset types or what have you. So, well, I'll just bring right to your point here. So, like, some of the most promising data that we're seeing now, is actually from the Northeast. because that they were hit so hard in March and April and May, that, you know, everything was shut down. But for better or for worse, because they sort of swallowed that very, very painful and in a lot of ways tragic pill, they're in the best position right now in terms of rebounding. The strongest market in the U.S. right now for parking, do you guys want to take a guess?
Boston.
DC.
New England.
Lester, what's your guess?
DC.
New York City.
Really?
I was closer. I'll take it.
So the New York is it's a different parking market than any other market in the U.S., and that's primarily a function of land use. So garages in Boston and Houston and DC, they're typically going to service maybe one or two types of parking demand, right? Office and then maybe a handful of events. The land use in New York is such that it's so mixed that a garage can benefit from residential demand and office demand and event demand and who knows what else is going on in that city, right? So here's a little interesting statistic, and I just pulled the latest data on this. So this is hot off the press. Basically from the bottom, I've got a collection of garages in New York that I monitor just to sort of like a pulse on sort of what's happening in that market. From the bottom in April, basically through the back half of April and May, garages in New York were experiencing an 11% week-over-week growth rate. That trend accelerated in June and July to 17%. Now, it doesn't sound meaningful, but if you're able to compound at 17% relative to 11, that's pretty meaningful. And then if you take a look at sort of like the year-over-year comparison, the national average right now is that most garages from a revenue and transactions perspective are down about 65%. In New York, that number is closer to 40. And there's some facilities in New York that are down only 25. I can't believe I'm saying down only 25%. Take me back to 2019, where a garage is down 25%. I start having heart palpitation. What's going on here? Now it's something to celebrate.
One of the things that we're interested in is the shift between mobility of returning to your office or working remotely and versus catching the metro. And the New York operates on the metro. So I'm wondering if there's some substitution of mode happening there.
It's a really big question, Brett. And I think, every week, every day is going to give us a better sense. I have seen some photos of the subway in New York. I've never seen it cleaner. I was born in Manhattan, and they're doing such a nice job of keeping those trains clean. But I got to be honest, I'm not sure I'm hopping on the subway anytime soon. And so whether there's going to be a resistance to taking public transit to personal transit, I hesitate to draw conclusions here just because it's still early in the game. And, I talked a little bit about just how different New York is relative to some other markets. Like, I don't know. I mean, BART here in San Francisco gets pretty crowded, but it's never as crowded as the subway, right?
Sure.
So how comparable is that? But, the early indicator would be, my assumption is, the parking industry will benefit from some of that shift from.
It's funny. I found myself using Uber a lot less, just for two reasons. One, it was like, I wasn't sure how well I wanted to be on there, and two, the availability of an Uber, like you're waiting 3-4 times as long as you ever had to before, and some of the pricing has gone up for more remote type services. So I just found myself renting a car when I travel. I traveled a little bit, and I haven't done that in years at this point.
Okay.
I've got a couple of friends that work at Lyft and Uber, and we're actually comparing notes. The drop in transaction volume that they saw is actually pretty right on par with what we were seeing from parking.
Wow.
I haven't checked in with them to see whether the recovery is sort of on track, but Lester, I'm the same for you. Yeah, I tried to avoid Uber and Lyft just as a general policy. Sometimes I cave, but definitely less comfortable jumping in the back of somebody's car that I don't know. It's not like they've ever been a hallmark of cleanliness to begin with, right?
You're more concerned about it these days. We've also
Hi to our good friends at Uber listening.
Yeah, enjoy. We've noticed a big uptick in contactless payments as well.
Yeah.
So the payments we are getting, it seems to be like a 40-50% increase in contactless payments, whether through, your Apple phone, Google Pay, or just contactless cards. Like people all of a sudden like discovered that that's like a thing.
Okay. Cash has gone through Cass, not Cassius. Cash handlings dropped to next to zero, I would imagine.
Yeah.
What about the variance between street parking and structure parking, Cassius?
Yeah.
Are you seeing much of a preference one way or the other there as people start to return? Or they sort of
big time?
Yeah, right.
So on-street parking has just been way more resilient than off-street parking. I think, it's just a little bit more visible. I think that the nature of a type of customer that leverages an on-street parking space, they're running into a shop or what have you. I mean, people are out and about and they're trying to pick up food and what have you. And I think on-street parking serves those needs a little bit more, whereas off-street parking is a little bit more catered, and a big part of it is basically commuters. And given all this work from home behavior that we're seeing, those folks are going to be much slower to come back than somebody who's running out and needs to go grab a pizza.
Are you looking at revenue related to on street, or are you looking at just occupations in the spaces? Because I know some municipalities have just stopped enforcement of on street.
Yeah, so we've seen different reactions from different cities. I am somebody who was constantly advocating for more paid parking, especially from a municipal standpoint. I think outside of providing critical revenues, it also does a whole bunch of other good things for cities. But anyways, some cities unfortunately turned off meters. The best policy response that I saw is, some of my clients in Santa Monica and Houston and Miami, basically they just kept the meters on, but didn't enforce. And so it's a little bit of a heartwarming thing to see, is that you actually get a fair amount of people paying the meter. It's not trivial, even though they don't have to, and I think in parking,
even without the stick, huh?
Yeah, I think in parking we're
they listen to the podcast now. You might find
we're so focused on sort of that, what's the word that they use, the non-compliance rate, the scofflaws, right? The folks that are going to try to cheat if they can. And I think statistics will tell you that 5 or 10% of people we're going to fall into this category. But I think what we were able to see through the data is that a way larger percentage of people would actually just pay the meter, even if they didn't have to. Maybe it might just be that they weren't aware that they weren't enforcing or what have you. But it was really heartwarming. And even if your revenues are down, let's say 80% or 70% or what have you, and let's say you were doing $100,000 a week and now you're only doing 20 is way better than zero, right?
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
Everything's better than zero.
Right.
On that, I think if you start to disconnect the message that you don't have to pay, you then struggle to turn that back on at the end of it. When do you make that decision to start to charge again? So I think that's the best strategy out of the strategies you can choose.
Big time, yeah. So for the next global pandemic, I would advise all of my clients. But yeah, no, a couple of our clients turned off meters, and working with them to turn things back on was, gosh, I was, for the most part, we were successful. July 1 seemed to be a date where folks were pretty comfortable just saying, okay, we're going to make this happen. But free parking is a drug, and people get addicted to it real quick. And trying to take that away is not easy. I would not wish that upon anyone. And so if you can avoid having that conversation, you should do that.
I worked at in Vegas when we took MGM paid parking for all the, for all those facilities that were out there, and they just recently turned it back off.
Yep,
it's now free in Vegas again, which was shocking to me, based on the investment that they had made to do that and the benefit they were going to get from that revenue for maintaining those facilities.
Yeah.
But that's where they're at now.
Yeah, you just talk about sort of like how unique New York is. I mean, Vegas is also arguably more unique in its own little unique way. So they've got a host of challenges in that city. I think I'm hopeful that paid parking is going to return. I mean, you got the Raiders coming and a number of things that I think were catalysts for these casinos to start thinking about paid parking. But let's just say they've got bigger fish to fry at the moment.
Yeah, no doubt.
That's right.
You know, part of the push on it, they were so close to the airport that you could go over to MGM and park for a week for free inside the parking structure, and then catch an Uber for $5 over to the airport, and you were way better than the $25 a day at the airport.
Right. Yeah, I think that just speaks to all of the reasons why you need to manage and pay for parking outside of generating revenues is access control and basically making sure that people aren't taking advantage of adverse incentives, you know?
What's the second wave look like versus the first?
Yeah, so unsurprisingly, or two of our big municipal clients that I sort of was looking at as a bellwether, and I mentioned like the depth of the crisis was in April, right? And that's when all of these numbers were just atrocious, down 90, down 95, garages just closed, right? Two of the systems that were the most resilient through that period were the city of Houston and the city of Miami. And so where the rest of the industry was down 95, those guys were down 70, and they were climbing up way faster than everyone else. Maybe I should have been calling the CDC back in April and saying, hey, look, this is indicative of people not really sheltering in place or what have you. Hindsight's 2020. Again, for the next pandemic, I'll be prepared.
So they're virtually theoretically they're under their first wave still. So they're crashing on their first wave. Yeah.
So I think I would say, right, 85, 90% of clients, right, we've been on that low and then it's been just up, right? Yeah, and then some locations actually had a down week, but that was for the 4th of July, not so much because of COVID related reasons. But Miami and Houston both sort of had changes in trajectory in early June, where these are the two of the cities that have been sort of like the most impacted by the second wave, if we're going to call it that. And we saw declining transaction volumes and declining parking revenues and declining occupancies in Miami and Houston starting in early June. Now, you know, I'm not even sure what my clients would tell you, but I would actually say that that's probably a good thing, right? In terms of, you know, if this industry is going to be around, then we've got to quash this pandemic and
step forward.
Right. So, you know, Southern California has been a little, that's like the other hotspot. It's been, instead of seeing things climbing, right, we've sort of seen it level off. And so instead of sort of like this resumption in growth, like, you know, we're seeing declines in Miami, Houston, but in Southern California, it's more like we're just flatlining. So, you know, and where we tend to have clients in Southern California is more on the west side. And, you know, Southern California is a big place, right? So no paid parking in Imperial County, so I can't tell you what folks are doing down there. But that's sort of how the second wave has been. Yeah, up here in Northern California, we're starting to see some growth, but San Francisco's still locked down. The financial district, you could, you know, tap dance on Kearny Street and no one would bug you. So,
wow.
Is anyone talking about a new norm in some of the areas that have started to return? Is anyone close to a mature level, or is it still in a level of fluctuation?
I think if we're trying to look for normal, the market that's probably close to that is New York. Maybe Boston is close behind. I think the tough thing about using New York as a what is normal looks like is it's just so unique, right? And so I think about San Francisco, and a lot of the employers out here are tech companies, you know, Smarking, I'm working from home. The guidance that we got probably through the rest of 2021, I think Facebook, Twitter, Square, all those guys said work at home. But if you're a Wall Street trader, you got to go in, right? And so
Sure.
I'm not entirely sure how much New York's new normal is going to be representative of LA's new normal or Houston's new normal or what have you. I do have some insights into some Canadian clients, and I would say Vancouver is another, behind New York, is probably like our second strongest market. They're back at 50% of their volumes historically, but still a lot of the office parking is still down, but more of the recreational stuff. People are going out and about, and that's just because they've got fewer cases up there.
The interesting thing will be when there is a solution to this more generally, with either all immune or we have future waves or we have a solution to it, to watch what then happens and behavior starts to change and mature. I guess you've given us some great insights there, Cassius. Are there other things that you think are important for us to have a look at?
Yeah, the other things that I wanted to talk about is sort of just like what we've seen some clients do, and sort of like trying to just anticipate, right, how some of this stuff might shake out. I think monthly parking is a space to watch. I think I referenced Airbnb, sort of how they changed the hotel industry and sort of started to blur the line between what's a home, what's a hotel. I think for in off-street parking, we previously sort of had this tendency to say transient and monthlies, right? And I think similarly, we're going to start to blur some of those lines. I think folks that were coming into the office 5 days a week are going to start to come in 3 days a week. And what sort of products are we putting out there in order to market for that type of demand? I think that the touchless and contactless revolution is going to sort of like expedite using QR codes as your credential and just holding up a phone. And I think that there's going to be a lot of really interesting opportunities around sort of like, if we see this proliferation in different types of monthly parking products, how do we price those? How do we measure whether they're being used the right way? It's tough to forecast how things are going to look and whatever normal winds up being. I think the thing that I can say with confidence to the listeners today is that it's not going to be like April, with nothing. It's even the second wave, we're still not anywhere near those levels. But whether we're back to 100% or whether we're back to 80%, or hey, we might be back at 120, right? That's tough for me to forecast. I do think that monthly parking is going to be a space to watch, and sort of how you price and allocate those and what sort of products that you've got to offer to that segment of the market is going to change in a pretty meaningful way because of this pandemic.
We've seen that immediately already as a transition where all of a sudden they want to now issue passes that work for 10 days a month, any 10 days a month, instead of the traditional monthly pass that comes into play. That was the very first reaction, almost universally, that people started making those changes.
The second,
they figured out. What's that?
Yeah, the second reaction was those operators who have leasing arrangements, seeing their revenue go to the floor, and so how that picks up will be interesting to monitor too. I'm not sure, Cassius, if you have some insight on that.
I think, the parking operations market is an interesting one. I think a lot of these leases are getting broken. I think locations are changing hands. I don't, I'm not in any position to be saying who's a winner and who's a loser, but you'd imagine that coming out of this thing, there's probably going to be more management agreements than leases. So definitely presents a couple of opportunities there, and how these sorts of agreements get structured. And
I think that there's also a tension there between, okay, you're managing the facility now, the facility's changed significantly, maybe we reconsider management at all. There's some great opportunities there to pull parking inside. Maybe it's blended more with the rest of the operation of the facility as well. I'm seeing that anyway, those conversations happening.
seeing a lot of revenue split stuff, like leases convert to revenue split, that sort of thing, where it's like nobody can predict the revenue. We're going to have costs to operate this thing the way the building wants it to be operated. Revenue splits after that kind of are making a lot of sense right now.
Yeah, I think a revenue split, like if I ever was privileged enough to own an office building, I think that's the way that I would do it. I think, parking operations is going to be a business for a very, very long time. I mean, these folks provide an essential service, and they're good at what they do, and building owners need them. I think maybe similar to the transient versus monthly, sort of becoming a little bit more blurred, right? There's got to be a middle ground there between the management and the lease, and I think the revenue share makes sure that there's that incentive there to make sure that we're doing all the right things in order to maximize the revenue, but still making sure that the operator's got a base level of compensation for all the labor and hard work that's going into keeping the lights on.
Yeah,
very true. Yeah. What else have you got, Cassius? What else are you seeing out there?
So I've got two more things for you, Brett. So
this is fantastic.
You can ask me one more, and then I'm tapped out.
Very good. Very good.
So
this is the man with all the data. We got to get as much as we can out of this.
I'm going to start frantically clicking around. Oh, I can tell you on 17th Street. So this is not going to come as a surprise to anyone, but talking about resilience, right? As much as I can, I like to end on a positive note. So some of the locations that we've actually seen up year over year, and Smarking, if you're down, we got a red number, and if you're up, you're a green number. Green numbers are hard to come by these days, but there are a few of them. And if you're seeing green numbers, then chances are your parking asset is next to a park, a beach, or some sort of outdoor amenity. So I think for better, for worse, or I think this is for better, people are reading the news and understand that outdoor transmission of COVID-19 is very difficult. And they're seeking out opportunities to get out of the house in a safe way. And they're headed to beaches and parks and what have you. So up in Vancouver next to Stanley Park, numbers are through the roof. Everybody's out trying to get out, walk through the trees, walk through the run. City of Santa Monica has been a great client of mine for a long time. We segment their meters into 3 different zones. The parking meters near the beach is a zone, and those beach parking lots are closed right now because the state of California, Gavin Newsom, says let's not promote crowding, but people want to get out there anyways, and so they're parking at the meters near the beach, and they're getting out there and hopefully recreating in a safe way and wearing a mask and what have you. And so could be a little revenue strategy there. If your garage is down 90%, build a park next to it.
Those with beachside properties win again.
Right.
Yeah. No doubt.
And then the other thing that we've seen is sort of like a little bright spot. And Brett, this is my last thing here. So
no, we could talk all day. That's the problem. Yeah.
There was, I think, some folks basically taking advantage of this downtime as an opportunity to do some construction. And so if you were doing better than the national average, but you weren't near a big park, then you were probably benefiting from construction parking. So that's been sort of like another little bright spot, especially some locations that we're doing in Chicago and New York fit that bill, Boston as well, is, there's this lull in traffic and everything else is down. People are trying to take advantage and build some infrastructure. And so construction parking has been another bright spot that we've seen across the industry.
We were working on a project in Pasadena, and it was just, the place was just, all the construction parking got transitioned over to some of these fairly empty office buildings. And normally where they had big signs up, no construction parking, now it's like, come park.
Come in.
We'll serve you lunch.
Yeah. Eat on your tailgate. We don't care. Have fun. Come eat. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I really got some good value out of that.
Me too, man. That was fantastic.
Super interesting. Yeah.
Gents, you're too nice to me. It was an absolute pleasure being on. Yeah, my final message is, hang in there. We're seeing these week over week growth trends. I think we're gonna pull through here. What the industry looks like on the other side might not be the same, but I have just as much conviction as ever that parking professionals have a strong role to play in this world, and the world needs us. So we'll just push through.
Love it. I think Lester we'll get him back on the show maybe once a quarter.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
We can
make that a recurring spot for sure.
Yeah, I think we say, hey, Cash, you said this, it didn't happen. I want my money back.
Yeah.
I'll just put up my Venmo and then people can request me.
Yeah.
Right?
That was better than an OnlyFans page.
Thank you for listening to the Parker X podcast. We sincerely appreciate it and hope you are enjoying our content. Please remember to rate, review, comment, subscribe, and share. And follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. The following has been a production of Parker X.